Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk to the 3 stages that parents experience on their journey with their differently abled child. So Cindy Kaplan is a conscious parenting coach. She's also a family coach and a yoga practitioner, is going to speak to this topic with me today. She's also the mother of a daughter with cerebral palsy, and I am the mother of a daughter with atypical Rett syndrome. So we are speaking from experience today when we speak to these 3 stages. So the 3 stages are, the first one being mourning the fantasy, the second one being acceptance, and the third being embracing. So Cindy, why don't we kick off this conversation and maybe start talking about mourning the fantasy and what that's all about?
Sure. I think that whenever we know that we're going to have a baby entering our lives, whether it's through adoption, whether it's we find out we're pregnant, however we receive that child, as soon as, well, I should say even before that, right? If I know that at some point in my life I'm going to have a child, I have already begun to form a fantasy of what that's going to be like, right? When I have a child, she or he is going to do blank, or my child is going to look blank, my child is going to be blank. Like, it happens even before we know that this child is about to enter our lives. So when we either find out that our child has a diagnosis, whether it's 3 years in, 5 years in to their life, whether it's we find out something has happened, whether it's been a traumatic birth, whether it's a brain injury, whether it's an illness that the child has suffered in utero, there is a sudden extreme shock to our psyche. And that mourning the fantasy it's very different than when, say, a grandparent or an older parent of our generation dies, right? We know that's coming. This is like the beginning of a life. We have these fantasies, and all of a sudden that fantasy, it just crumbles, right? It crumbles so quickly and so deeply. And it's like we're standing naked in unknown territory, not knowing where to move. And I know that for me personally, I was so grateful to see my beautiful baby, and this knowing that something went wrong, something happened, and not even understanding that. But this urge I had to constantly hold on to something that I could predict. So we're thrown into this place of unknown territory, and it's really scary. So there is this mourning of the fantasy for sure, but it doesn't happen and then it's done. I mean, it plays over and over and over again. My daughter's about to turn 20 years old, and I still have moments that are little, like, I think about them as little pain points, where it's like, oh, right, I'm mourning the fantasy, but now I can name it. So that's what I think of when I think about mourning the fantasy. What about for you?
Well, mourning the fantasy, as you said, in those early stages, we have this picture of what our life is going to be like, what our kids are going to be like. We picture our kids playing together. We picture holidays and vacations, whatever it may be. We have this idea, we have a plan. And I think this is a lot of parents have a plan for their life. They can see ahead. They feel comfortable in being able to plan ahead. And when we have a child that is different, I mean, for me, it was different than your experience in the sense that we didn't know right away. So it was kind of this gradual awareness that something was wrong. Mm-hmm. My child being delayed, so getting a first diagnosis of global developmental delay, and then eventually moving into having a final diagnosis of atypical Rett syndrome. And you know, in some ways, your experience is this massive shock to the system instantly.
Yes.
Right? Whereas in my case, it was this gradual experience of this gradual understanding of what is happening, but then also seeing kind of how you're responding to it.
Yes.
Right? So you're mourning the life that you thought you would have, you're mourning the child that you thought you would have, and you're not yet in that space to, one, accept your child, and then secondly, embrace your child as they are, because this experience brings up so much within us. And I think that's when I speak to, you know, how are we responding to the situation in those early stages as a parent? You know, you respond, perhaps you're in a place of fear, wondering what's going to happen. What does my child's future look like? Are they going to have a normal life? Are they going to be happy? You know, and then we start to think of our own lives and our own dreams and everything we'd pictured for ourselves, and start to wonder, well, what's my life going to look like now? You know, what kinds of responsibilities, right? You've experienced this too, right?
Totally. Well, I was just going to add that, and I think in listening to you too, there's almost like for you, there was this gradual sort of like noticing something isn't quite right, but the denial of not wanting to, right? So you're sort of
Absolutely.
in this push over. For us, it was, you know, sort of like very clear. But the other huge piece, if not as big, as we mourn the fantasy of our child and the plans and the vision of what we thought it would be, we're mourning the fantasy of who we thought we were going to be, right? It's as much, and I know you know this, it's as much a fantasy of who we thought we were going to be and what our lives were going to look like, not only because of this child who is going to enter our lives, but who the role we were to play as we move forward with this child.
Right. And I think there's this whole process of moving into this new way of life, and it takes time. So it's mourning not only the fantasy of the child, but just of how we were living our lives. Just simply planning is no longer, you know, it's really about becoming present. And as we go through this process of mourning the fantasy of who we thought we were, that's kind of what shifts us into that place of accepting and eventually embracing, you know. And I think that's why you and I have decided to set it in these kinds of stages, because every single parent goes through this. There's no way that you know this happens to you and you're like right away in that place of embracing, because most of us are not in a place of embracing ourselves.
Right.
So it's simply impossible for us to completely see our child without that being enmeshed with our own wounds.
Absolutely.
And insecurities.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some of those, you know, as years go on, you know, certain things like, oh, wait, I thought we would be, oh, now I know that this is something we can't do. Or, oh, my child has a doctor appointment, so I can't be present at this moment. So there are these continual moments or these continual pain points of mourning the fantasy. It's not as big as that initial one for me, but they still happen. They still happen. But I am more equipped myself to see them and deal with them. But yes, it's not I'm done with the mourning. Now I'm moving on to accepting and embracing. It's, you know, it comes around and around and around and around.
Right. And you even say, you know, the journey is not linear.
Right.
So it's not linear. I mean, we're on a path towards that place of embracing our child, ourselves, this new life. Mm-hmm. We're on that path. But of course, sometimes we regress. And actually, there was another conscious parenting who told me something one day, you know, sometimes when your car is stuck in the mud, you have to go in reverse before you can move forward. And so sometimes that regression is important, and it's part of that process. And I think it's important just to mention that from a self-compassion perspective, to understand that, you know, we're all on a path.
Yes, absolutely.
So now in terms of accepting, when we speak of accepting for the parent. What do you feel that looks like?
You know, for me, I think when I hear accepting, for me, it's accepting of the as is. It's being able to see what is happening in front of us, whether it be a challenge with our kids, whether it be that we can't go on the vacation I thought we'd be able to go on, whether it be that my kid won't have the conversations with my daughter the way that I envisioned before she entered our lives, or even just having caregivers in the house, right? Like accepting is, this is the life we have. This is the life we have. And yeah, it's not without challenges, but this is the life we have. So accepting to me is both accepting the as is and then figuring out how to move forward without getting stuck in the mud, as you say, right? So it's, I might feel that pain point, and then I remember, okay, but this is the child I have. These are the children I have. This is the family I have. This is the life I have. So if I accept, it prevents me from going down the rabbit hole of self-pity, not enoughness, feeling broken, and complaining, which for me brings you into a spiral, into a dead end of which there's no getting out of. So I think for me, part of that acceptance is both accepting the as is of who we are, what our family is, who our family is, what our life is like, and then looking for I'm hesitant to say the word positive, because it's not that I'm wanting to paint over something with glitter. It's, how do I want to move forward? So it's looking for, well, what is happening, and what is going well, or what can our family do? What can I do to perhaps attain a similar feeling of something that we can't do in the way that I want it to look? But it prevents me from going down a feeling sorry for myself.
Right. Because I think, and you know, I think a lot of parents go through that stage of being the victim, right? Because it's hard. It's
So
hard.
understandable.
But I think in some ways that space of accepting is then noting that you have a choice, is that you can choose to stay and linger in the suffering.
Yes.
Or you can choose to see this as an opportunity to move out of the suffering through the experience with the child, accepting that this is the path that has been given to you for you to grow into who you're meant to be. You know, I mean, if we bring in that conversation about conscious parenting and our children being our teachers.
Exactly. It's the difference between feeling pain and suffering, and it's the difference between being a victim and being in victim consciousness.
Right.
Right. And that victim consciousness is really toxic. And the suffering is really toxic. But I think it is really important for anybody watching or listening to this, is that the pain is real. The pain is real, and the hardships are real, and the hurt is real. But at that point, when we're in that acceptance, is where we have a choice.
Yeah. And, you know, the beauty is that there is light at the end of that tunnel.
Yeah.
There is beauty in this journey, in this experience, right? And the only way for people to speak of it is like you and I, you know, we've gone through that. We've gone through those stages, and we are now in that space of embracing, so we can speak to the process and what it feels like to come to that space where you're truly embracing that whole experience, including the child. But as you and I have talked about, oftentimes parents will stop at that acceptance phase where they choose to say, this is my life, okay, but deep down they're still wishing for something different, or still hoping for something different. It's not accepting, but then embracing everything that comes with that experience and that journey.
Yeah. Do you want to go into a little bit about what that means to embrace?
Yeah, let's move into it.
You know, I feel like that embracing is, and I think for most of us with our kids with special needs, you know, at some point, I think we all, we touch that, right? There's definitely a chord to, we know how amazing our kids are. But as you and I have spoke so much about, everything around us continually gives us the message of brokenness. I think the more that I do my own work and the more I have done and worked on my own healing and understood who I am and accepted who I am, that I can look at my daughter and in so many ways think to myself, I want to be like her. Mm-hmm. She is not, as you said in that quote that you put out a while ago, so stunning, that these are kids who are not suffering from the human condition. Now, I know that's big and that may not be true for all kids, but it's like we've had sitters who will say, I need to come spend time with Mira. I'm missing Mira, right? And Mira's at camp right now, and I am so missing her. So grateful to have this time without having all the medical stuff and without having all the caregiving stuff to think about. And I miss her realness. I miss that there's no fakeness to her whatsoever. And she touches in the experiences, and I know you feel this with Gabby too, is that when I'm with her, when I allow myself to truly, truly be with her, I'm living life the way I want to live life. And I see her and what she emanates. And it's the stuff when I talk about what's truly important in life, that's what she's about. I mean, I think we've talked about how these kids are so moved and touched by music. And it's because they allow it. There's nothing getting in their way, right? Where we may have all these thoughts and ideas or things that we should be doing. So we may hear a beautiful piece of of music that may really move us, but we don't feel it because we're engaged in our to-do list. And these kids they're just in it. And I feel like when I am truly embracing her, I feel whole. I feel worthy. I feel whole. I feel like I am living a life that I truly want to live. And that is separate from still all that there is to do. I guess I have learned that there is a distinction between all there is to do in the caregiving that is hard and exhausting, and I accept it, and her, my child, as a person. And I have embraced. Like, I don't think I would want it any other way.
Right. Because, I mean, they're exactly what you said. They're so authentic. They're not wearing masks like all of us are. We learn to wear masks as a means to belong, whereas they're just unapologetically themselves, and they teach us so much. They actually move us away from the suffering by helping us reconnect with that authentic space with who we are. And it's almost like they're that guiding light for us in so many ways, right? But it takes for us to choose at that acceptance phase, to choose to do our own work, so that we could start to move into that place where we start to understand them, to start to see what is that true meaning of life. What are we really here for? Yes. What does it mean to be happy? You know, what does it mean to be fulfilled, feel joy? The truth is that they emanate. I mean, when we're speaking about our own children and some of the children we work with, and this won't apply for all the children, but they're in that space of joy because they're enjoying all of the simplicities, the most simple of things that we take for granted, right? And as you mentioned before, when we're in that space of lack, of not enoughness, whether it's about ourselves or about what we have, then we can't be in that space of simply enjoying the simplicities of life.
That's right. So it's almost like we can't fully step into this place of embracing if we're continuing to stay on this path of trying to fix them, of trying to reach these outer goals, of ignoring stepping into their world. Like I used to say, I remember years ago giving a talk on inclusion and talking about how this isn't rocket science. This is about not trying to figure out how to place these kids into our way of living, but it only requires us to step into theirs. And that does not take rocket science. But if we are continually trying to get them to point B through these means that have been prescribed, it's going to be really hard to get to that place of embracing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is this awakening to the beautiful aspects of the journey.
Yeah.
So it's the whole experience itself. What has this taught me? You know, how have I changed as a result of this? And, you know, we often hear parents say, I'm such a better person.
Yes.
As a result of this child being in our lives. So there are so many beautiful benefits to the experience, you know, separate from, of course, it comes with a lot of responsibility. It comes with more to do, you know, that's for sure. And we accept those things. But within, we're so much happier. You know, we're so much more accepting and embracing of ourselves, that stuff is okay. It's okay. I will take all of that extra stuff for what I feel within me that I can now take and express out into the world, right? Because when we're in that place of authenticity, when we can just be ourselves, we're not exhausted, you know, not as much as when we have to wear all these masks constantly and be different people for different people, right?
Yes. No, I think the bringing up of the masks is so important.
Yeah.
So it is so much uncovering of who we think we need to be for these kids.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think this is, and we won't talk about it today because this will be our next theme, but Cindy and I are going to speak to the dynamic between the parent and child along these 3 stages and what those different stages are, explaining how, as the parent begins to shift on this journey, how it's going to impact how they show up for the child. And we spoke of fixing in those early stages, but you know, there is also this process with our children and how we start to shift how we're showing up for them. And we will definitely touch on that on our next conversation.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for being with us today, and please subscribe, and we'll look forward to chatting more about this in our next session together.